A single husk emerges from the coal-black earth. A soft, fevered body, no larger than a human fist, curled within a cocoon of ash and filament. The world around it is bitter, a winter that has run too long. The air a glass-thin knife that steals heat from exposed flesh. Here, in the cracked margins between frozen river and wind-scoured scrub, life that can't keep its own fire dies quickly. From this crucible, a juvenile is born not armed with claws or teeth, but with a suite of physiological compromises honed for one imperative: to generate warmth where warmth no longer exists. The larval stage is a study in concentrated economy. Muscles are compact and richly supplied with mitochondria, a dense latticework of cells tuned for intensive oxidative metabolism. Fat stores are compacted beneath a flexible exoskeletal plate, chemically rich in long-chain lipids that burn slowly and cleanly. A microbial consortium in the gut, carried from parent to offspring in silk-like secretions, specializes in oxidizing refractory organic compounds and releasing heat as a byproduct. The larva moves with a low, deliberate rhythm, conserving energy, sensing microgradients of warmth with filamentous sensilla that read the subtlest shifts in air pressure and thermal flux. In a world where a single hour of exposure can mean death, these tiny decisions when to curl into the warmth of a sun-warmed stone, when to feed on a withered leaf rich in hydrocarbons, determine survival. As it matures, the organism undergoes a transformation that reads like evolution made visible. Tissue architecture rearranges. Where compact larval muscles once favored endurance, new fascicles develop with rapid contractile myofibers capable of violent, short bursts. The trunk extends. A lightweight, semi-flexible endoskeletal scaffold supports broad, overlapping wing surfaces. These wings are not delicate paper but multi-layered membranes, studded with scale-like plates that serve three convergent functions: to insulate, to radiate, and to modulate airflow. The scales themselves are pigmentary and structural, microplatelets that can shift in orientation to change the wing's emissivity. Beneath them lie arrays of capillary-like channels filled with a heat transfer hemolymph that can be rapidly pumped to radiative surfaces or shunted away to avoid cellular overheating. Brain development is no less radical. Neural tissue swells in the optic and antennal centers. Circuits that once governed simple foraging become integrated with high-bandwidth processing, devoted to spatial pressure gradients, thermal imaging, and social chemical codes. Volcarona's sensory world is a map of heat and motion. The rustle of frozen grass becomes a pressure cue, the shudder of a distant predator, a faint thermal signature. Motor control evolves in tandem wing beats, are finely graded, producing not only lift, but sculpted vortices and shock fronts that can unbalance an opponent or lift a drifting ember into a defensive smokescreen. Every movement is a negotiation between aerodynamics and thermodynamics. The ecology that shaped these adaptations is uncompromising. Volcarona occupies a narrow niche in an ecosystem punctuated by extremes. Long winters, when cold is the dominating force, and brief summers when the landscape floods with insects and fermenting plant matter. It is an apex ectothermic endotherm, an organism that straddles two metabolic strategies capable of sustained internal heat production during the lean season and strikingly efficient energy use during abundance. The wings serve as solar collectors as well as heat radiators. On still days, an adult will orient itself to maximize incoming radiation, fluffing scales to trap warmth like a living parabolic mirror. When feeding, it does not chase broadly. It hunts with a deliberateness born of metabolic thrift. Low, sweeping patrols along thermal corridors where prey clusters congregate, sudden downward strikes that combine suction with thermal shock to immobilize soft-bodied targets, and a precise tolerance for distance that keeps its core temperatures steady. Social structure around these creatures is subtle and hierarchical. Adults are largely solitary. but they exhibit structured aggregations around heat sources and breeding roosts. Dominance is rarely decided by blunt force. Instead, it is maintained through ritualized displays of thermal control and chemical signaling. The dominant individual claims the best radiative roosts not by fighting, but by demonstrating the ability to regulate its heat output, a slow, deliberate pulsing of wing scales that sends out an infrared signature recognized by conspecifics. Pheromonal bouquets, released from specialized abdominal glands, encode not just sex, but metabolic history. A rich, smoky tincture suggests recent access to high-quality combustible food, and therefore superior provisioning ability. Subordinates yield in the face of these honest signals, because the cost of physical combat, potential loss of precious fat stores, or damage to the wing radiators is too high. Predation and competition force behavioral creativity. Predators that would chew through a wing membrane are met not with blind fury, but with strategy. When threatened, an adult mounts a complex defensive choreography. It opens its wings to full span to present a field of intense, radiative heat, then executes short, high-frequency wing strokes that generate a pressure wave, a sonic thump like a muffled drumbeat, destabilizing smaller aerial attackers. It times sudden flares of heat to disrupt the predator's sensory tuning, whipping up curtains of smoke from its own chemical secretions and creating pockets of superheated air that shimmer and bend incoming threats' visual cues. Movement becomes deception. Posture becomes a declaration of control. Dominance in this moment is not the last talon left unbroken, but the one that can measure, redirect, and neutralize threat without exposing core tissues to risk. Hunting, too, is a lesson in precision. Rather than rely on brute force, Volcarona exploits thermal microclimates and prey physiology. It seeks insects whose neuromuscular enzymes are temperature sensitive, using targeted warm bursts to induce stupor. It co-opts the landscape, using updrafts generated by its own wing flaps to lift volatile scents from the ground and carry them toward receptors that can pinpoint prey or carrion beneath snow. When food is abundant, adults demonstrate loyalty, returning to specific foraging corridors and provisioning the nearby roost with concentrated lipid stores. Juveniles, raised in those roosts, learn through a blend of instinct and imitation. The timing of wingbeat flares, the angle for radiative basking, the precise mix of pheromones that signals kin. The confrontation that defines the legend of this organism plays out not in unending combat, but as a contest of control. On a night when the thin moon hangs like a coin above a shattered mesa, a Volcarona adult faces an intruder, a broad, predatory avian adapted to sub-zero hunting, talons like ice hooks. The avian hunts by generating a localized cold front, a spray of subsonic, evaporative chill that can congeal an exposed hemolymph stream. The two meet on the thermocline between wind and sheltered cinder. The avian dives, folding into a wedge of chilled air. The Volcarona responds by oscillating its wing membranes in precise microsecond pulses, generating a sheath of superheated vortices that lifts desiccated peat and ash into an incandescent cloud. The attack is foiled not by raw heat alone, but by physics. Smoke and radiant energy distort the avian's cold spray. The pressure waves unsettle its glide angle, and the thermal signal overwhelms the predator's cold receptors, causing it to miss the optimal strike point. The Volcarona then disengages, not to pursue, but to reconstitute its roost and reclaim its microhabitat. Victory, here, is measured in territory retained and energy conserved. When we step back, beyond the glow and the drama, what remains is an elemental story of adaptation. Against winters that seem intent on folding the world into glass, this creature persists by measuring, by timing, by converting scarcity into ritual. In local tales, it is the sun's wrath and the hearth's salvation, a living ember that walks. In ecological truth, it is something at once humbler and greater. a specialist whose existence recasts a frozen landscape into a place where heat, fleeting, earned, and fiercely guarded can be found.